So I just saw Dr. Sleep and it was not great. I really don't know what people expected from a modern sequel to a Stanley Kubrick film. When the film opens, it's very clearly trying to emulate the tone of The Shining, but then for the next 2 hours it does its own thing, which is good, I guess, but at the same time it really didn't need to be related to The Shining at all. Aside from the last half hour of this movie, it could have just been some completely different new intellectual property. I mean, if that were the case, then nobody would see it, but still. Now, this is the same director as The Haunting of Hill House, which is a Netflix show that everyone went crazy over a year ago. I watched all of it in one sitting and was planning on reviewing it, but got really busy with other projects, so I'll just give a mini review for that right now, I guess. If you want to skip my thoughts on The Haunting of Hill House, then just skip to this point in the video to continue hearing about, oh yeah, Dr. Sleep is what it was called. There's your warning, 3, 2, 1. The Haunting of Hill House was a show that I enjoyed parts of. There's a decent amount about the show to appreciate, but overall I found it an incredibly frustrating experience. First of all, I don't really find ghosts scary. It seems like 99% of the conflict is essentially them just going, boo, I'm gonna make a scary face, you're gonna be scared. The only time there's any real danger is at a few key moments in the show, and those moments are pretty much just at the beginning, middle, and end of the series. The show goes on for about 10 hours and it essentially just blue balls the entire time, not just in terms of conflict, but in terms of unraveling the mystery of what's happening. About halfway through the series, there's a reveal that's actually pretty great, and conceptually it's pretty terrifying, but then it just goes back to blue balling for the entire rest of the series until it's over. I felt like I finished this show out of obligation. I had already made it so far that I felt like I had to finish it. What's particularly frustrating about this show is that there are several really cool ideas. There are several moments where I was thinking, wow, I love the design of that, or wow, I love how that was shown, but every single time I appreciated something about the show, it would just wind up spamming it. They would take a cool concept and then just do it a dozen more times until it lost its effect. It unfortunately did not know how to be restrained in any way, which I guess is a problem that is brought on by the fact that it is a 10-episode miniseries. I genuinely feel as though you could edit down this show into a 2-hour-long film and it would be great. Seriously, the entire story could have been communicated in that amount of time. Every aspect that I appreciate about the show would still be in there, but it wouldn't be spammed dozens of times. It's not a bad-looking show, and there's one particular episode where the cinematography was fantastic, but there are other elements to its presentation that really prevent it from being great for me. The child performances were all unbearable, and it wouldn't be such a big deal if they didn't get so much screen time. Again, the way they drag everything out in this show is also unnecessary. Most of the elements that I dislike about this show are ones that don't need to be there at all. The terrible child performances are ones that you can't even entirely blame on the actors. The dialogue that they were given was so incredibly inappropriate for children. They all talked like adults, and it was incredibly frustrating. Not only did all of the children talk like adults, but they all talked like the same character. Seriously, everyone in the entire show talked like the same person. Every single time any of the characters opened one of their mouths in the show, all I could hear was the writer. It was extremely noticeable and distracting. The effects in the show were fine for it being a show, but this, along with many other elements, are ones that people would criticize much more heavily if it were in an actual movie. And that brings me back to Dr. Sleep. This is a movie that I feel probably would have worked better as a miniseries. And no, not like that shitty one from 1997. What I mean is that the universe in this film is something that you could actually do a lot more with. Oftentimes, the production quality of this film felt like I was watching a modern television series. The effects would be much more forgivable, the characters could be more properly developed. There's plenty of stories you could tell with this setup, and despite the 2.5-hour runtime, it felt as though they didn't really do much with it at all. There's like a dozen characters in this film that all have the shining superpowers that we don't really know much about at all. They kind of just show up to be used as props for the conflict, and it doesn't really change anything. The main villain of this film is super fucking lame. She's got a stupid hat that I guess the movie thinks looks cool. She was honestly more annoying than anything else. The child performances were alright, I guess. Nothing amazing, but nothing absolutely terrible. Ewan McGregor actually did a pretty good job, and I was convinced by his performance. At least in this film, the characters actually sound like different people. Unlike The Haunting of Hill House, it's not something where every single character is just the writer. For the majority of this film, I was just a little bored. It wasn't so terrible that I was entertained by it. It was just slightly below the bar the entire time. But then, hoo boy, when the last half hour of this movie kicks in, then it gets god-awful. It pretty much just devolves into, remember The Shining? Remember this scene from The Shining? You like this scene, right? They had a lot of actors that almost looked like the characters from the original film. They recreated several iconic scenes, but just did it so much worse. And a lot of these recreations weren't even really flashback sequences, but more or less just callbacks. Like, oh no, now Danny's slowly walking backwards up the stairs, wielding a weapon while the villain is slowly walking towards him. It's just all happening in a very similar way for no reason. The last half hour of the film was laughable and embarrassing, but even the previous 2 hours that wasn't as bad was still really lame. The whole movie was filled with cheesy jump scares and inappropriate editing choices. It pretty much just ignored everything that made The Shining so great. If that's the kind of movie you want to make, then great, but don't pretend as though the experience of watching this film is going to be anything like the original. There are a couple stupid character things that I want to point out, but they're kind of spoilery, so if you don't want to hear those, then skip to this point in the video. There's your warning. 3, 2, 1. Dr. Sleep is one of those movies where the characters are often frustratingly stupid, not in any kind of way that's consistent or purposeful towards their characters, of course not. Just the usual, oops, I guess this entire conflict could have been avoided if I had more than 2 brain cells sort of thing. So the villain tried to steal information from the little child's brain, but it turns out that that whole thing was a trap set by the little child, who is actually pretty OP. It winds up injuring her pretty bad, and you'd think that she would have learned her lesson, but then she leads all of her friends to go in and try and get her again, and they fall into a trap again. Oops, if only there was some sort of way we would know that we were walking into a trap. If only that had been done before. That particular instance of character stupidity from the villain is pretty insignificant when you compare it to how stupid the main characters were. So the villain tried to get the little girl once already. They clearly established that the villain knows where the little girl lives now. So Ewan McGregor and his friend go to the middle of the woods where the decoy is, where they wind up making the second trap, and the little girl is making visual tricks from afar so that she's theoretically not in danger. But then she winds up getting abducted from another character while Ewan McGregor is away in the middle of the forest, because they were so stupid that they had her doing all of this from her home that the film clearly established that the main villain knows the location of. One of them just shows up and kills her dad and abducts her, and that's it. The entire second half of the movie wouldn't have happened if they had just rented a hotel. The way it was presented, it didn't even seem like they locked the fucking door. Out of all of the locations you could have been, you chose the location that the villain found you at before. And don't come at me with that, oh, she's a little girl so she's dumb bullshit. There were 3 other adult characters that coordinated this entire plan with her. Everyone dumb. Even if you ignore how stupid the characters are, the whole movie just feels way too goofy. The only reason the villains kill people is to steal their life gas that comes out of their mouth when they die. Every single one of these sequences is unintentionally hilarious. They gather around like crack fiends and start sucking in the air above their mouths. We get it. You vape. Anyway, this movie wasn't the worst thing ever, but it was not very good. It was way too long for how little it explored. Every computer-generated effect felt like exactly that. The characters were stupid. The villain was difficult to take seriously. So yeah, probably don't check this one out. It feels less like a love letter to The Shining and more like a tasteless cash grab. If you're hoping to laugh at this one and enjoy it ironically, this isn't even a great one for that. The last half hour of the film certainly delivered in that sense, but it was a chore to get there. And I'm giving this one a 3 out of 10. And also, if you're curious about my rating for The Haunting of Hill House, I'm giving that one a 4 out of 10. That one's closer to a 5 than a 3. Thank you.